Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. Genetic genealogy helps ID one of the victims of the infamous Green River serial killer. Even with a confession to dozens of murders, police say the case isn't closed yet.
Wendy had to have her name back, and they weren't satisfied until that's done.
Ghislaine Maxwell wants her charges dropped in the latest legal bid in the Jeffrey Epstein saga. Plus, a Florida paramedic admits to stealing vials of COVID-19 vaccines, but says he did so under duress.
We go, why would you do that? He said, well, he said there's this captain.
And why police say a deadly road rage incident was racially motivated.
The defendant intentionally acted to strike the victim.
Brian Buckmire along with Terri Austin. Genetic genealogy identifies the youngest victim of serial killer Gary Ridgway. Angenette Levy spoke with a member of the group that helped put a name to the remains.
Yeah, Brian, for decades, those remains were simply known as Bones 10, but DNA technology has finally identified her as Wendy Stevens.
For years in the 1980s and 90s, the Green River Killer terrorized the Seattle area. The remains of young women and girls left in wooded areas around the river.
I was just a kid when this crime really first started impacting our community here. So I've seen it both growing up in Seattle, and it was seeing the work and how it was featured here was one of the things that motivated me to join the sheriff's office.
Kings County Sheriff's Office Sergeant Tim Meyer said the Green River Task Force worked tirelessly to find the murderer. Gary Ridgway was on their radar. But it wasn't until 2001 that DNA testing confirmed Ridgway was the killer. As part of a plea agreement, he confessed to murdering 49 girls and women and led detectives to more remains. The work of identifying victims wasn't over, including a set known only as Bones 10.
She was in our system known as Bones 10, and that was just a designator that was given for our investigators, all of our detectives, everyone at the medical examiner's office. They are not satisfied with that.
Last fall, investigators enlisted the help of the DNA Doe Project, a nonprofit that uses DNA from victims to find matches to potential family members on genealogy websites GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA.
How quickly were you able to put together Wendy's identity?
Most of the matches that we looked at were in the third cousin range. And then when we were building them out, we found connections between those trees. And we found a couple that united clusters of some of these matches. And that couple turned out to be Wendy's parents.
Bones 10 became Wendy Stevens, a 14-year-old girl reported missing from Denver, Colorado in 1983. She had run away from home. Her remains were found in March of 1984. Now, 37 years later, some answers finally provided to Wendy's family.
In this case, it was really difficult. At the same time, there is a sense of accomplishment being able to give her back her name and our other John and Jane Does. I feel like it restores some of their power and their dignity so that they can, be essentially home.
The DNA Doe Project is also working on another Green River case. That's Bones 20. Karen Binder said they had a little bit of trouble extracting the DNA from those remains, but they are working on it and hope that they can provide that set of bones identity. And there's also Bones 17. That is another set of remains at the Kings County Medical Examiner's office. Right now, Gary Ridgway, he is 71 years old, and he is in a prison in Washington State, serving 49 life sentences. Brian.
Angenette, is there any way the public can help with these cases?
Yeah, there really are a couple of things that the public can do. This is an all-volunteer nonprofit organization, so people can donate to it, and all of that money, I'm told, goes to DNA testing, which, as you know, can be very expensive. And GEDmatch, that's one of the websites. I am told by Karen Binder that you have to opt in to allow law enforcement to look at your profile in these cases, so they are asking that people do that if they submit their DNA to those websites.
Thank you, Angenette. And joining us now for legal analysis is criminal defense attorney Julie Rendelman, along with Terri Austin. Julie, this is about giving Jane Doe, or as they called her, Bones 10, a person that many had long forgotten, her name. As a former prosecutor, you know how important it is for the victim's family to get that closure. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, when I listened to Angenette talking about the idea that someone, especially a 14-year-old, is identified by just the word bones 10, it's absolutely chilling. And just imagine a family who loses a 14-year-old, which, by the way, I believe the 14-year-old was the youngest, at least as far as we know, the youngest victim of this serial killer. And so it's imperative. Obviously, there's never going to be closure for this family. But for all these years, they've wondered, is it their child that was the victim? And now at least they know. And it's not just important for the name. There'll never be closure, but at least they know that there are at least some answers in regards to where their child is.
Exactly, and those answers are huge for the family. Terri, Ridgway was convicted, interestingly enough, without naming or IDing some of his victims. What do you think this means finally for the family to know where their daughter went and to hear her name?
Well, like Julie said, I think it does give them some closure. Remember, Wendy ran away from home and they didn't know what happened to her. So on the one hand, they now know. On the other hand, they could have been thinking that maybe she just was leading another life. So it's got to be extremely disappointing. I will say I was impressed by Dr. Catherine Taylor. She was the forensic anthropologist on the case, and she just kept at it. And she said one of the reasons she kept at it was because this was one of the youngest victims. She was only 14 years old, and the anthropologist wanted to make sure that the family knew exactly what happened to their daughter.
And absolutely going to applaud the perseverance of those who worked on this case, not letting almost 4 decades go by without them finding a name for that victim. Thank you both. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, the shocking admission of the acting Capitol Police Chief over the deadly riots. But first, actress Lori Loughlin is out of jail for her role in the college admission scandal, why her husband finds himself still behind bars. Next. Welcome back. And now to check in on some of today's top stories. Fashion designer and husband of Full House actress Lori Loughlin, Mossimo Giannulli, has once again been denied early release. A federal judge ruled that his case does not meet the extraordinary circumstances required for home confinement. Giannulli is currently serving a 5-month sentence in California for his role in the college admission scandal. Giannulli's attorney said he had been in isolation for nearly 2 months, which has apparently taken a toll on the designer's mental, physical, and emotional well-being. Giannulli is due to be released in April. The acting Capitol Police Chief admitted to failures and culpability in her department's response to the deadly insurrection. Chief Yogonada Pittman said they were aware at least 2 days prior there was a strong potential for violence, but did not sufficiently act. The statement was made to a House committee in a closed-door meeting. She said Capitol Police requested assistance from the National Guard on January 6th, but had to wait over an hour. 5 people died during the storming of the building, including Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick. Attorneys for Ghislaine Maxwell are asking a federal judge in New York to dismiss all charges against her. Maxwell is accused of sex trafficking and recruiting girls on behalf of now deceased millionaire pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. In the motion to dismiss, Maxwell claims a non-prosecution agreement, or NPA, between Epstein and the federal government in 2007 should shield her as well. In addition, defense attorneys say the charges are not specific and that prosecutors unfairly used the grand jury in White Plains, New York, rather than in Manhattan, where she's charged. Maxwell pled not guilty, and her trial is scheduled to begin in July. Prosecutors say Maxwell helped Epstein exploit girls as young as 14 years old.
Maxwell played a critical role in helping Epstein to identify, befriend, and groom minor victims for abuse. In some cases, Maxwell participated in the abuse herself. That abuse included sexualized massages, during which the minor victim was fully or partially nude. These sexualized massages developed into sexual encounters, for which Maxwell, in some instances, was present and participated. Maxwell and Epstein worked together to entice these minor victims to travel to Epstein's residences.
Here for legal analysis is criminal defense attorney Julie Rendelman and co-host Terri Austin. Terri, prosecutors' vagueness of when and who really seem to be the driving force here in the defense's motions. But is that a reason to dismiss the charges?
Well, yes, it is a reason to dismiss it. But if in fact it was dismissed for vagueness, they would be able to replead because it would be dismissed without prejudice. And I actually took a look at the charges and the pleadings, and frankly, I think they are specific enough. They don't have the minutia and the day-to-day detail, but they do say that the crimes occurred between 94 and 97, and they do give some specificity. So I don't think it will be dismissed at the end of the day.
Agreed. Julie, the defense is trying everything to make these charges go away. What do you make of their argument that Epstein's NPA in Florida should also protect Maxwell in federal court?
Since Maxwell was arrested, and the problem she has with it is twofold. One, the agreement not to prosecute wasn't with her; it was with Epstein. But the biggest problem is it wasn't just not with her; it was in Florida. Florida has no control over what the New York government decides to do or what the federal government decides to do. So I don't know how she would survive an argument where it's Florida that made this quote unquote agreement that has absolutely nothing to do with the federal charges in New York.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Terri, quickly, what do you think about that agreement as well? Should it protect Ghislaine Maxwell? It does seem, as Julie's saying, is kind of apples and oranges.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to protect her here. I think different jurisdictions, and I think it doesn't relate to her, and it was not her agreement. So I think she's going to have a hard, road there.
And we'll be able to watch every step of that road as it continues. Thank you both for contributing on that story. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, Houston police officers accused of being on the other side of the law. Plus, find out how a Florida man went from Paramedic of the Year to behind bars. Those cases and more after the break. Now to Florida, where police say the 2020 Paramedic of the Year and a fire captain are behind missing vials of COVID-19 vaccines. Joshua Colon is facing charges of forgery and falsifying medical records. Colon was assigned to administer vaccines to first responders. According to the Polk County Sheriff's Office, Colon claims fire captain Anthony DiMano pressured him into leaving extra doses for his family. Colon has resigned from his position. Captain DiMano remains an employee on good standing, but Sheriff Grady Judd says that will soon change.
He's under criminal investigation. He would be arrested today, but he's on his way back from out west. He will be arrested upon his arrival here. There's a captain at the fire department called Tony DiMano. And Tony supposedly went to Joshua Colon and said, I'd like some vaccine for my mother. And Joshua Colon rebuffed him, said, no, I can't do that. So he made several requests of this vaccine from the paramedic. And the captain was told, I can't do that. So what occurred was there were 3 syringes with 3 doses of the vaccine that Joshua Colon put in a plastic bag, put in a special refrigerator, and sealed it. And then at the direction of the captain, he took a break. So he left, take a break, and when he came back, voila, the seal's broken and the vaccinations are gone.
Back for analysis is Julie Rendelman and Terri Austin. Julie, this whole duress thing doesn't really sound right to me. As I understand it, duress is when you are compelled by danger or emergency. I didn't hear it here. Did you?
Yeah, I didn't. Just so we're clear, Brian, this is so bad and so wrong. I mean, we talk about the fact that, people are, someone described it as the Hunger Games, where people are trying desperately to get access to vaccine. And now we have someone doing what they're doing, which is just so despicable. But you're right. I don't see the duress here. Yes, there might be some mitigation in the fact that the captain may have held something over his head, even if we believe that's true, which I question whether it's true or not. But no, I don't think at the end of the day, the duress in terms of an actual defense claim will work and help him out of the situation.
All right, so Terri, maybe no defense, but the way they're getting arrested and the treatment they're receiving kind of bothers me a little, because you have one of them who gets to resign as a first responder and another who gets to leisurely drive across the country in his RV to get arrested on his time? How is that working when they stole from first responders who are attempting to stay healthy to help their community?
You know, you're 100% correct, as is Julie. This is a despicable crime. And, you know, that is what the fire department is doing. That has to do with his misconduct. But rest assured, Polk County Sheriff Grady is going to make sure that they have criminal charges against them. And those charges include forgery, it includes falsifying medical records and, you know, creating a fictional person. I mean, I love this sheriff. We've seen him before. One of the things that he said that I thought was so interesting, he said, do these guys have brain cells? And what he said is they not only stole these vaccines, but they put them in a car. So it wouldn't even be usable for the purpose that they stole it for. So I think that they're going to be prosecuted.
Yeah, not the sharpest tool in the sheds, but glad that they were discovered in this case. Thank you both for your comments. When we come back, a road rage incident that ends in murder. A grand jury in Texas has indicted 9 Houston police officers after a deadly raid led to investigators uncovering an alleged scheme to steal overtime money.
Dennis Tuttle, Regina Nicholas, and their dog were shot to death in their home during a raid executed by Squad 15 of the Houston Police Department Narcotics Division. The investigation determined first that Goins lied to a judge to obtain a no-knock warrant to raid the Tuttles' home on Harding Street, and that officers had been involved on that squad in a long-term scheme to steal overtime money from the city of Houston.
One officer was indicted for murder and faces up to life in prison. The other 8 officers are charged with engaging in organized criminal activity, theft by a public servant, and tampering with governmental records. Several other officers were charged last year. 4 officers were shot during the raid, leaving 1 paralyzed. A Massachusetts man is accused of murder following a deadly road rage incident that investigators say was racially motivated. Dean Kapsalis is being held without bail after Belmont police say he yelled racial slurs and hit a man with his truck. Henry Tapia died from his injuries not long after the incident. Witnesses say the two were seen pulling over to the side of the road and getting into an angry dispute.
Mr. Tapia had been involved in a verbal altercation on Upland Road when an individual had yelled racial slurs at Mr. Tapia, who was a black man. And then after that slurring and the use of those terms came as the verbal altercation seemed to have come to an end. In fact, Mr. Tapia was observed by various witnesses on the sidewalk and in their home to be returning to his car when the slurs were used. At that point, the individual, who was later identified as Dean Kapsalis, allegedly entered his vehicle, which was a Dodge Dakota pickup, drove it at Mr. Tapia, striking him as he stood by the driver's side of his car. Mr. Tapia was dragged a short distance by that pickup truck before it fled the scene.
Police ordered a be on the lookout for the red truck, and the defendant turned himself in about 30 minutes later.
Those are the facts. They do not speak to the loss of life partner and father suffered by Mr. Tapia's family. We are reminded that incidents like this that are allegedly born of hateful speech have a lasting impact on families, friends, and our neighbors here in this community.
Back one last time for analysis is Julie Rendelman and Terri Austin. Julie, at the bail hearing, the defense said Kapsalis owns a business in the community and is a father when asking for bail. The judge denied that request and held him without bail. Do you think that was the right move by the judge?
So I think both you and I, Brian, know that if this case had happened in Brooklyn or New York, I would say 99% of the murder cases are on remand. So there's no bail. So it's not unusual for us to see that. I think one of the biggest problems for this defendant is not only did he run over the victim, or at least allegedly do that, but he fled the scene. So there could be no clear indication of an individual not wanting to come to court, then fleeing the scene. Now, some would say he turned himself in later, but still he fled the scene after committing this crime. And I think that's one of the things, besides some other, problems in his background, that the judge is going to look at when thinking he's not going to come to court on his own.
Yeah, and that's the ultimate question when it comes to bail. You look at their history, you look at what the strength of the case, and like you said, Julie, the flight is a big part. Terry, a hit and run with racial epithets, does that amount to a hate crime or civil rights charges?
Both, actually, Brian, because the Massachusetts Attorney General can bring charges under their Civil Rights Act and also under their hate crime laws. So in addition to the murder charges that we might see against Kapsalis, we will see, I think, some civil rights charges and some hate crime charges, because there were words that were said at the scene of the crime and others heard these words. So I definitely think, obviously, the road rage in and of itself is a horrible crime. But when you think about the fact that underneath all of that, it was based on a bias, and the whole purpose of the hate crime law is to make sure that you don't have these sort of bias motivated crimes. So I do think we're going to see those types of charges, and hopefully they'll be successful as far as that's concerned. The only positive part of this case, and yes, he ran away, was the fact that he did ultimately turn himself in.
All right, thank you for joining us here on Law&Crime Daily. We'll see you next time we discuss justice in America.